Hello, everybody. I'm going to try to give my absent students a brief rundown and perhaps any of those of you who want to refresh your learning of what we talked about in class, the opportunity to hear my little lecture about genetics versus the environment. Today we're going to start our make, where we're going to do something with what we've learned, and so it's time to review. The first thing we need to talk about is what is a trait. Okay, so we learned that a trait is a quality or a characteristic feature of an organism. Things like eye color, hair color, personality. Uh, See a few examples on the screen. Cleft chin, blonde hair, freckles. Okay, and we met our two twins, Mo and Jasper, and they were arguing over whether their differences were due to their similarities and differences were due to environmental or genetic factors, because identical twins have identical DNA, but these two twins were separated at birth, and so they presented different traits in some areas. So one of the big buzzwords or buzz phrases in this content is said to be nature versus nurture. You've probably heard that. It's one of the biggest debates in the scientific community. So what comes to mind when you hear nature versus nurture? Well, if you think about the definition of nature, our genetics play a huge role and we're born with that. That's our nature. Nurture is how when I think of nurture, I think of how you nurture a child, how you are raised. So nature is more genetic versus nurture, which is environmental. So it's essentially talking about the same thing we're learning about in class, genetics versus the environment. So when we say nature versus nurture, we're really just talking about genetics versus environment. We say a trait is determined by genetics or nature. It means it's passed down from your parents in your genes, and you were born with that trait. When we say a trait is determined by environment or nurture, it means that you have that trait because of the environment you grew up in, which includes your life experiences and your surroundings. So they come together and make you you. What are some traits, diseases, or conditions that you think are caused by genetics? What are traits, diseases, or conditions that you think are caused by an environment? So we had this discussion yesterday about certain cancers. Certain types of cancer can be linked to both genetics and environmental factors. Mostly, we're kind of landing the plane at that it's probably a combination of both. So sometimes traits appear because of a mixture of genes and environment. So for example, nature on the left-hand side here, your genes would give you eye color or sickle cell, which is a genetically inherited disease. Your environment might give you scars or the language you speak. So those are things that have to do with nurture or your environment, where you have lived your life choices. And then they meet in the middle and present these traits. So one of the traits might be light-skinned people are at greater risk than darker-skinned people for developing skin cancer due to exposure from the sun. So even though your genes code for a trait, environmental factors can change that and cause a trait to present itself. So nature versus nurture. So for example, this is my friend Eric. Eric is friendly. I want you to think about, is Eric friendly because he was born friendly, or did he grow up in a positive environment? Okay. So getting to the bottom of this question is very difficult. So scientists look at studies to investigate this question. It's a huge debate in science. Is personality, especially genetic or environmental? And so you need to think about what we know about scientific experiments. So in order to study something, everything needs to be controlled or the same throughout your experiment. The only thing you can change is one experimental variable. So if you're thinking about studying genetics versus the environment, you need to have, if you're studying environment, you would need to have a set of identical twins who share the same DNA, because you would need to keep that as a controlled variable. Genetics would need to be controlled if you're studying differences or experimental variables, perhaps caused by the environment. So scientists often use twins in a lot of these studies because their genetics are the same, so that gives them a control variable. So identical twins have the exact same genes at birth, but they're not always, as we saw in our solved mystery. Sometimes their traits differ as they grow, and this could be from environmental factors, and I think that's what the big debate is all about. Uh, it's very hard to study a specific, so for example, we could study plants, and twin studies are not the only way to see the effects of genetics in the environment. You can grow the same seed of a plant and change the impact of the environment by giving it different needs. So you can use identical seeds and adjust the environment, give one plant perhaps more water than the other, or one more access to sunlight than the other. So changing the environmental variables would give you evidence of the same change in environment. So it's a little more difficult though to study kind of that flip side of it. So if you're growing plants with different genetics, so how could you measure the impact of genetics using plants? Well, place plants with different genetics and identical environmental conditions, so trying to keep them the same. This means exposing them to the same amount of water and sunlight and seeing how changes occur, and you can determine that those changes must be from genetics because you're giving them the same environment. Oops, there we go. Other examples. A big one right now is the study of child abuse and neglect, very awful topic. However, this is a brain scan of a normal 3-year-old and also the brain scan of a 3-year-old who has undergone extreme neglect. So you can see the physical differences. Those physical differences often present traits that we see in children of neglect. The next one is body fat, especially in this fast food nation. There's tons of studies about whether body fat is genetic or environmental based on what food you consume or your diet. So they do a lot of twin studies in this area also. Jennifer, you can see Jennifer and Karen are twins. Jennifer eats healthy and has in low-fat food, and her obesity genes are not triggered. So they might both be carrying them, but environmental can cause a trait to present itself or not, depending on something environmental like diet. Karen eats fatty, unhealthy food, and her obesity genes are triggered, and therefore she's overweight. Another one is alcoholism. There's huge debate as to whether alcoholism is genetic or environmental, and it's very hard to do human studies in this topic because often there are other factors present, so it's hard to create a controlled study. There's huge evidence, though, that there is a genetic factor, and it's not all environmental. So I think one of the big key concepts of this unit is that it's not one or the other, as you noticed in that twin video where Mo and Jasper were arguing. It's neither genes completely or environment completely. It's kind of a combination of these three things. You have a combination of genes, environment, and individual choices that make you who you are. So it's everything from the genetics you were born with, the food you consume, the environment you're exposed to, and then also individual choices along the way, because we all know that people who live in the same environment undergo different individual choices, and that can change things also. So your task today is going to be, you're going to engage in one of the greatest scientific debates of all time, nature versus nurture, okay? And so when we say nature, we're talking about genetics, and nurture, environment. So which you're going to compile some scientific evidence to support a claim. And I have some outlines to help you do that, so don't be overwhelmed. You're going to make a claim. I'm going to give you a topic. You'll make a claim about whether genetics or environment has a greater impact on the growth of organisms. You're going to research genetic and environmental factors, and then you'll use so this is what your notes need to be. This will be from today. We'll go through this, make sure that you have these definitions to help you get started in your research. And then you're going to use this part of your graphic organizer to go through the process of constructing an argument based on evidence. So you'll make your claim, okay? So on page 2, here's where you're going to brainstorm genetic factors or environmental factors and make your claim. I think that blank factors impact the traits of organisms because. So this is a really nice outline to help you. And then you are going to listen to your group, read the article. So page 3 will provide you a box with notes. I want you to only take notes on your article for now, so you have notes to use. So if you, for example, in this picture, twin studies would be this group's box to record their notes. So then here we go. We believe that blank pick genetics or environment have a greater, so you will be given whether I will assign you genetics or environment, and your job is going to be to research that. So I'm going to have groups where I'm going to have one group per or two groups per topic. One will be genetics, and one will be for environment. And you're going to have to construct a debate between you two. So you're going to have supporting evidence for whatever side you're on, genetics or environment. And then I want you to make sure you research the possible opposing side. So let's say you were selected to pick genetics for your topic. You're going to have to find all the evidence that supports the claim that genetics is the reason for this situation. And also down here in this box, you'll research why what the environmental side could say about it, so that you can respond with a counter argument, which means you use those facts that the other side could say, and kind of have a rebuttal prepared or a response prepared. So when we do our debate, we'll go through this, but this is what you will essentially be doing. I will bring up both teams for each topic, and then both teams will make an opening statement. And then the starting side will make the first argument, whoever wants to go first for a minute, and then the opposing side will give a rebuttal. Then the other side makes their argument, and we give the opposing side a minute to rebuttal. And then the starting side makes a second argument, and opposing side gets to rebuttal. Other side gets a second argument, and opposing side gets a rebuttal. And then a closing statement, of course. So each side will have to have two really strong statements to prepare for their debate, and also be ready to rebuttal the opposing side, because it's a huge part of any debate. Here it's on page 7 in your packet. Here's your checklist and rubric. So this is how to be successful in this task and what you need to get the appropriate grade for your hard work. So I would caution you, please don't do page 6 yet. This is going to be a task for after the debate. We will reflect on what we learned and what we did. So good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.